Hey there, today I'm extremely excited to get to talk about the real Master of Metal and his frog. My name is Nate, and welcome to the Gamers Guild. The Mutant spoiler season has finally begun, and with it I'm very excited that one of the earlier ones we got to see was Magneto. And I don't want to downplay Toad. He's a very solid two-threat character that is going to help out the Brotherhood amongst other affiliations really nicely, even if he isn't my favorite in the lore. I will say I skipped ahead to these guys though because, well, Magneto. He's been one of my most anticipated characters and I am pumped to get to talk about him. With that said, let's dive into Toad first, who has the alter ego of Mortimer Toneby, or something close to that at least. He has 5 stamina, moves medium, is size 2, all for 2 threat. His defenses are 3 across the board, which makes his healthy side look pretty good for his overall durability. His first attack is Tongue Lash. It is a physical range 3, strength 4 attack that costs 0 power. Toad will gain power equal to the damage dealt from this attack, and on a wild, the attack may push a size 2 or less character away short before damage is dealt. Not that Toad's tongue lashing is likely to daze or KO a target, but it is nice that the push happens first, just in case. And if licking you wasn't gross enough, Toad's second attack is Spit Acid. This energy attack has a range of 2, strength of 5, and costs 2 power, and what is really disgusting from a gameplay element at least, is that after the attack resolves, Toad gets to hand out the Incinerate special condition with no extra strings attached. As a reminder, this is the condition that forces the target model to roll 1 less die on all of their defense rolls, which is a really strong effect. Unfortunately, this won't weaken up targets for throws, which the boss would appreciate, but this is still an effect you'll want to put out as much as you can anyways. Moving into Toad's range of powers, the first one is called Finders Keepers. It is an active superpower that costs 2 power and an action to use. This will then allow Toad to choose an allied character within range 2 and move 1 asset or civilian from the target allied character to Toad. Using this superpower doesn't allow Toad to hold more tokens than the crisis allows though. So no doubling up on extracts like Spider Infected or the citizens from Citizen Evacuation. But this is still a really strong ability to have even if it costs an action, because Toad is also really good at being able to get away. For instance, his next superpower is Hop. It is also an active superpower that costs 2. Toad is placed within range 2 of his current position, and the superpower can only be used once per turn. So if Toad has enough power, even though he has to burn an action to grab an objective token, he can still use Hop to get some distance from your opponent, along with his reactive ability, Slippery. This power also costs 2 and can be used after an attack that was targeting Toad that had to deal at least 1 point of damage. If he was dealt damage, Toad advances medium. There is no directional input, and thanks to his innate wall crawler ability, Toad is able to flee from his attackers even better. And a medium move will usually be enough to make a second attack on Toad pretty difficult to pull off. In addition to the aforementioned wall crawler, Toad has an innate ability called Prehensile Tongue, which, like many other words printed on Toad's card, sounds disgusting, and also like many of the things on Toad's card, is really handy. This innate ability allows Toad to interact with objective tokens within range 2 instead of the normal range 1. This changes the interact range from 1 inch to 3 inches, which is a pretty big change for a couple of reasons. The first is the round 1 objective play. With his medium move, Toad can double move to your opponent's side of the map and take an objective like a spider-infected civilian, and then once he is attacked, hopefully you'll have been able to feed him power either with advanced RD or some other way we'll talk about here in a moment, so that if Mort takes even 1 point of damage, he can use Slippery to get away. The other big impact that his extended interact range has is on the capturable secure objectives. Toad with his medium move can easily reach 2 of these type of secure objectives in a turn and flip the objective game into your hands. When he's activated at the right time, his average 3 energy defense will usually get the job done. With all of this love, I am sad to report that on his injured side, there is one change, and that is that his stamina drops down to 3, which makes him pretty easy to KO once it's all said and done. There's probably a bad joke about lightning and the Toad, but well, I'm not going to reach for it. For the pros and cons, Toad has an array of pros with very few large cons. Toad has a lot of stamina loaded on the front side instead of it being evenly distributed, which favors him being able to make an early objective play and survive the consequences of it. He's able to put out a really mean status condition for only 2 power, and he has a variety of superpowers that allow him to be a great objective player, whether it is taking an extract away from your opponent's side of the board quickly, or taking an important objective like a scroll from a friendly character and running away with it. Even if the objective play doesn't line up for Toad, he can at least start spitting acid and make your opponent's defenses weaker with a guaranteed status condition. Really, the only downside for the poor Toad is that he isn't going to hit very hard, which is no surprise when comparing him to some of the other 2-threat characters. And his only built-in consistency on offense is that guaranteed incinerate on spit acid. This can help him look better on offense than he really is, but when push comes to shove, Toad can hardly do either, and he would much rather run away with an objective, which is what he's great at, and let an ally like Magneto do all the heavy lifting. And man, Magneto skips the pushing and shoving and goes straight to throwing buildings and dump trucks. He has the alter ego of Max Eisenhart, but you're more likely to hear me say Eric before Max since that is his much more well-known alter ego. Anyways, Magneto has 6 stamina, moves short on a 50mm base, is size 2, all for the steep price of 6 threat. He has a 3 for his physical and energy defenses with a staggering 6 mystic defense because of his awesome helmet. At a glance, this makes him the most vulnerable of our 6 threat characters, but that's matching him off against the 20 stamina Hulk and Thanos. But he thankfully has plenty of tricks up his sleeve. But before we get into that, let's talk about his attacks. His strike is a physical attack called Reverse Polarity. It has a range of 3, strength of 6, and a power cost of 0. Like most strikes, Mags will gain power equal to the damage dealt with this attack, and there is also a second conditional ability tied to this attack. If the target character is outside of range 2, after the attack is resolved, push the target character short. The 2 really nice things about this is that it isn't triggered on damage, it's just a guaranteed push, and that the push can be in any direction. So push them away, pull them in, heck, like Magneto tugged the bodyguarding Captain America out of the way by the shield strapped to his arm. So what if they are inside of range 2 though? Well, in that case, Magneto gets to reroll any number of his 6 attack dice. You know, like Captain Marvel does when she spends 5 power to go binary, but it's just Magneto's strike for someone who gets too close, or who you pull in from range 3 with the first attack. Yeah, it's a bit terrifying. For Magneto's next attack, I want to give you some context so that you can easily understand some of its really unique properties. Magneto, using one of his innate superpowers, gets to create one terrain feature called a metal construct at the beginning of the turn and place it within range 3 of himself. These metal constructs are on a 35mm base and are considered to be size 2 interactable terrain features. Characters are not allowed to overlap a metal construct, and as such, they cannot be placed where another character is already standing. So with that in mind, here's Magneto's second attack, Shrapnel Blast. It is also a physical attack that is an area attack with a range of 2, strength of 6, but it does cost 5 power. The easy part about this attack is that after each attack is resolved, the target characters gain the Stun Special Condition, which is a status condition I have underestimated many times, I feel like, at this point, and being able to hand it out to 2 or 3 models suddenly is going to be very powerful, even if the attack doesn't do much damage itself. The far more interesting and to a degree much more complicated ability is that this attack can be used by measuring the range and line of sight from a metal construct that is within range 3 of Magneto. If you do, the metal construct is destroyed and removed from the board after all of the attacks have been resolved. The slightly weird part is that despite the attack being measured from the construct, any defensive superpowers that require certain measurements are still measured from Magneto. So abilities like martial prowess, martial artist, and even stealth are all still measured from Magneto's base instead of from the metal construct. So be sure to keep that in mind both when playing with and against the Master of Magnetism. Now let's talk about Magneto's leadership ability. From the Ruins triggers when a terrain feature has been destroyed. After the effect is resolved that destroyed the terrain feature, Magneto can choose a number of allied characters, including himself, equal to or less than the size of that terrain feature. Each chosen character gains a power. A character may only gain one power from this leadership ability per turn. So let's break down this stupidly powerful leadership ability. First, it has a very specific timing, after an effect is resolved where a terrain feature was destroyed. So let's say an opponent's vision is throwing a size 3 terrain feature at your normal-sized Ant-Man who does not have any power. Ant-Man will not be able to get a power from Magneto's leadership ability to use change size until after the throw has been resolved. At which point, if Scott is still alive, he can then get a power along with 2 other allies from the destruction of that size 3 terrain. So this leadership ability is able to act like a very powerful advanced R&D every single turn. And what makes that even better is if it is your opponent who destroys a terrain feature, you still get the power to distribute amongst your own team. Really, the only limit is that a character can only get 1 power per turn from this ability. So to put it in perspective here, you can have Vision, who has a 2 power costing size 3 throw, turn 1, move, throw a Daily Bugle into a car, and that 2 power suddenly becomes a 5 power advanced R&D, giving 1 power to up to 5 different characters. So Magneto is a power generating beast when it comes to his leadership ability alone. Thankfully, he has some very useful ways to spend that power. His only active superpower is called Fatal Attraction, as a power cost of X. Magneto can spend 1 to 4 power when paying the cost of this ability, choose an interactive terrain feature within range 3 and size equal to the amount of power spent to use this superpower, and throw it long. Which seems good and all, but this is where it gets really interesting because he does not have that usual line of this superpower can only be used once per turn that every other throw in the game has. Instead, Fatal Attraction's last line says before using the superpower, this character must pay 1 power for each time it has already been used this turn. So basically, as long as Magnus has the power for it, he can just keep on hurling terrain at his opponents. And spoiler alert, Magneto will have a decent bit of power to hurl things at his adversaries. So what about when they strike back? Magneto also has a reactive superpower called Force Projection. It only costs 2 power to activate and can be triggered when Mags is targeted by an attack or would have to make a dodge roll. This character uses its Mystic Defense to defend or dodge. This character cannot be pushed or thrown as a result of the special rules of this attack or collision. So first off, Magneto for 2 power can make his defensive stat a 6, which is the highest printed number we have seen for defense. So yeah, that's already really good. Then additionally, Magneto can also ignore getting pushed or thrown off a point from that attack. That is also really, really good. Whether it is keeping him on a point or just being able to not throw him into an ally, either way is a very handy ability to have attached to getting to roll the extra defense dice. Then finally we have Magneto's 2 innate abilities. The first of which is one that I talked about a little bit earlier, Master of Magnetism. It triggers during the power phase. If there are fewer than 2 metal construct terrain features in play, place 1 metal construct terrain feature within range 3 of this character. It is a size 2 interactive terrain feature that cannot be overlapped. Then Magneto gains 1 power for each metal construct in play. Nothing too crazy in here outside of the extra power gain for Magneto, getting 1 extra power the first turn, and probably 2 power for the rest of the game, as long as you're able to keep 1 construct on the table at the end of each round. This ability does get a little bit wonky if both you and your opponent have brought Magneto though. Since the metal constructs are just terrain features not controlled by any player, they can be thrown and everything else as normal terrain. But this also means that the max number of constructs is shared between the 2 players, so if you have a Magneto mirror match, just follow the rules carefully and you should be set. Magneto also has the innate superpower of flight, and with all of his powers covered, I do also want to mention real quick that his stamina goes up to 8 on his injured side. So, pros and cons time. Pros, Magneto is an offensive juggernaut. He re-rolls his 6 dice strike, solid. If not re-rolls, a push in any direction, also really good. An area 2 attack that guarantees stun to all enemies hit by it, Again, solid. As many throws as he wants as long as there's terrain and power, good. Makes his own terrain and power with that terrain. Oh goodness. Can make any of his already average defense the highest printed defensive stat in the game. Also makes it so he can't be pushed or thrown from that attack. I think you guys get the point at this point. Magneto is a beast, as well he should be. He is a 6th threat character after all. Some of his 6th threat competition is Thanos and Soul Gem Doctor Strange. Neither of whom should be underestimated, but also neither of them are quite as lethal or dangerous as Magneto is. Thanos and the Good Doctor both have abilities to help out their team, and not just in the form of their leadership, but through reactive abilities to help bolster attacks or defenses. Magneto doesn't have any of that in his arsenal, but we do have maybe the deadliest character in the game. I say this because in a proxy game, I had a staggered Magneto who managed to deal more than 10 damage to my opponent's MODOK, and again, that was with Magneto only having 1 action. Magneto can generate up to 3 power during the power phase, and his strike should be pretty good for generating some extra power as well, especially once Magneto is within range 2. And since he won't have power problems, he should be pretty defensive most of the time as well with his force protection. So when we look at this 6th threat, what is the weak point to exploit? At the end of the day, the easy answer is his speed. Moving short on a 50mm base isn't the worst movement out there, but it is the 2nd worst in the game. If Magneto is having to spend power to stop from getting pushed by Shuri's Panther gauntlets, that's a good waste of power. Not to mention superpowered pushes, throws, and advances Magneto has no defense against. But really his biggest weakness is the D objective setup for secures. Magneto needs to constantly be influencing the tide of battle, and if he is left on one side of the board, he'll be hard pressed to make it to the other side to be of much help. So much like when you see a MODOK that you don't want to play against, spreading out objectives will be a solid line of play against Magneto before he can even hit the table. But for those who love the Brotherhood and really want to see Magneto shine and maybe help buff out a few of his weaknesses, there are a couple of tips I have. The first is bring either extreme conditioning or climbing gear to help get Magneto into the fray early, or at least earlier. Giving Magneto some extra mobility with one of these cards will help keep him as a mobile threat, even if only for 1 turn. But in a game that is usually over by round 5, and the first round would typically not matter for him anyways, 1 round could make all the difference. My second tip is to use the metal constructs defensively as well as offensively. Obviously it is tempting to get an easy and early shrapnel crush off at the beginning of round 2. Something I might recommend doing instead though is to place your constructs as either cover for Magneto, so in front of him, or as a bumper directly behind him in base-to-base contact. The cover in front will continue to increase Eric's defenses, and one behind you can stop him from getting pushed or thrown away when attack is coming from the other side so that not as much power needs to be spent on his force projection. Magneto is going to be a very strong character, and as well he should be for 6th threat, and it may take playing against him and losing against him and his Brotherhood a few times until we learn how to effectively play against him. One other weakness I am remiss to share because I'm quite the fan of Magneto is his vulnerability to multiple attacks. Whether it is from an ability like Rapid Fire or Flurry, attacks taxes Magneto's power supply, and by getting several attacks in, it's going to be a really effective way to disrupt his massive power generation and get a good bit of damage in on him in the process. With that last bit of advice done, I do want to talk a bit more about the Brotherhood as a whole, with what we do know and what is at this point a little bit of speculation. The Brotherhood, like the X-Men, are going to feature 2 leadership abilities, so it's probably going to be important to have additional characters from outside the affiliation for both of those leadership abilities to really flourish on the table. When I look at From the Ruins, what the Brotherhood/Magneto needs is characters who can destroy terrain and characters who can easily make use of the extra power. As well, it is probably better to keep characters with a threat rating of 4 or lower in mind when running Magneto, since he is a rather expensive character himself. With these things in mind, my 3 recommendations to join Magneto's Brotherhood from outside of affiliation are Valkyrie, Captain Marvel, and Green Goblin. All of these characters can interact with terrain features in such a way that they don't remain on the field, and all of these characters can make use of the extra power Magneto is able to give out to them. For Valkyrie, maybe this means an extra Warrior of Legend for her next Dragon Fang, and while she is not a power-starved character, she can easily spend 10 power in a single turn. Captain Marvel can suddenly go binary as early as turn 2, and Goblin can get up to all sorts of mayhem with extra power, including an early Night of the Goblin attack. Each of these characters can excel in the Brotherhood just by getting the extra power from Magneto's ability to become a major threat, not to mention they can also help earn that power back, and Gabi does it on your opponent's turn, which is crazy. Now, I didn't mention Punisher here only because Mystique has a very similar set of abilities, most importantly, an ability that detonates a terrain feature, and she is in affiliation, which sets her above Frank. At this point, we also have an idea as to what some of the Brotherhood's tactic cards do. Asteroid M seems to be a Brotherhood-affiliated Mothership tactic card, allowing your team to teleport to one another as long as they aren't holding an objective. Magnetic Refraction will provide allies within range 3 of Magneto with cover for the round, with a way to get the tactic card back as long as you're playing within the Brotherhood. And Magneto also seems to have a mighty tactic card attack that can destroy nearby terrain, and their size then adds to the dice pool. But I don't want to speculate on what these can exactly do or cannot do with the cards since we don't know exactly what they say at this point. But I'm only getting more excited for what the Brotherhood have in store for the game of Marvel Crisis Protocol. As always, and especially in this video, I want to say thank you to all the members of the Guild Hall who have been supporting the channel. It is because of you that I took the leap and got a new editing software that has let me do a couple of new things to hopefully raise the quality of my videos, with this one being the first one I'm using this editing program for. And as I learn more of the new tools that I now have access to, hopefully I will only continue to improve, or at least I will try to. So thank you all for the confidence you have given me with that. Before I go, I do have a question for those of you who are still watching. With Asteroid M being very similar to Mothership, and Magnetic Refraction sounding very similar to MODOK's Psychic Fortress, what do you think of having some very similar tactic cards that were unique to a certain affiliation or character being made available to other characters or affiliations? Let me know down in the comments below. If you have any questions or just want to reach out, I have my email and Facebook page down below. And as always, thanks for watching and keep on gaming.